February 11, 1990. Tokyo Dome, Tokyo, Japan. James "Buster" Douglas stood in his corner between rounds 9 and 10, knowing he was 12 minutes away from accomplishing something every expert had called impossible. The man across the ring from him, Mike Tyson, was the undefeated and undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Tyson had entered this fight with a record of 37 wins, 0 losses, with 33 knockouts. He was considered the most dangerous fighter on the planet. The odds against Douglas winning were 42-1. Only one Las Vegas casino, the Mirage, had even bothered to set odds because everyone knew this fight would be another quick Tyson knockout. But Douglas had just won 9 of the first 9 rounds. He'd bloodied Tyson's face. He'd knocked Tyson down in round 8, though controversial long count allowed Tyson to survive. Douglas's left jab, which experts had dismissed as his only notable skill, had confused and frustrated Tyson all night. Douglas's right hand, following those jabs, had landed with pinpoint accuracy, hurting the champion repeatedly. Douglas's mother, Lula Pearl, had died from a stroke 23 days before this fight. She was 46 years old. Before she died, Douglas had promised her he would beat Mike Tyson. Everyone, including most of Douglas's own friends and family, thought that promise was delusional. Mike Tyson didn't lose. Mike Tyson destroyed opponents. Buster Douglas, known to outboxing as a talented fighter who quit when things got hard, had no chance. But as Douglas sat in his corner before round 10, he knew his mother was watching somehow. He knew this was his moment. He was about to complete one of the greatest upsets in sports history. Within 3 minutes, Mike Tyson would be on the canvas, groping for his dislodged mouthpiece, counted out, defeated for the first time in his professional career. This is the story of how a 29-year-old fighter with a reputation as a quitter, who'd been labeled a journeyman and given no chance by anyone in the boxing world, knocked out the most feared heavyweight champion in history. How Mike Tyson's life fell apart in the lead-up to the fight while Douglas dedicated himself completely to his mother's memory, and why February 11, 1990 remains the most shocking upset in boxing history 35 years later. James "Buster" Douglas was born April 7, 1960 in Columbus, Ohio. His father, Billy Douglas, was a middleweight boxer who'd fought professionally in the 1960s and 70s. Growing up in a boxing family, Buster was immersed in the sport from childhood. His father trained him, taught him technique, pushed him to develop the skills necessary to succeed. By his teenage years, Buster was tall for his age, eventually reaching 6'4" with natural athletic ability. He played basketball at Lyndon McKinley High School and was good enough to receive some college interest. But boxing was the family business, and Buster chose to follow his father into the ring. He had natural advantages for a heavyweight. His height gave him reach advantage over most opponents. His jab, taught by his father, was technically perfect. He had power in both hands and decent movement for a big man. Douglas turned professional in 1981 at age 21. His early career showed promise. He won his first 4 fights. By 1983, he'd compiled a record of 16 wins and 2 losses, positioning himself as a rising heavyweight contender. But even in those early years, questions arose about Douglas's heart and dedication. He sometimes looked spectacular, dominating opponents with his jab and combinations. Other times he looked disinterested, losing fights he should have won to opponents he should have beaten. The reputation as a quitter solidified in May 1987 when Douglas fought Tony Tucker for the vacant IBF heavyweight championship. Douglas was winning on all 3 judges' scorecards after 9 rounds. He was 3 rounds away from becoming heavyweight champion. Then, in round 10, Tucker caught Douglas with a hard body shot. Douglas went to one knee, then signaled he couldn't continue. The referee stopped the fight. Tucker was the new champion. Douglas was branded a quitter. The boxing community was brutal in its assessment. Douglas had quit when he was winning, when the championship was within reach, because one body shot hurt him. Fighters are supposed to endure pain. Champions fight through injuries. Douglas had given up. trainers and managers around boxing warned their fighters not to make the same mistake Douglas did. Quit once, the thinking went, and you'll always be a quitter. Douglas's record after the Tucker fight was respectable, but unspectacular. He won some, lost some, compiled a 29-4-1 record by early 1990. He was ranked number 7 by Ring magazine, a credible contender, but not a serious threat to the champion. He was the kind of fighter promoters used as an opponent for champions or rising stars. Someone with a name, enough skill to make the fight look legitimate, but not dangerous enough to actually upset anyone's plans. Which is exactly why Don King, the legendary boxing promoter who handled Mike Tyson, matched Tyson against Douglas for February 1990. King needed an opponent for Tyson, someone who would make the fight look real without actually threatening Tyson's championship. The fight was scheduled in Tokyo because American casinos were tired of paying site fees for Tyson fights that ended in round 2 or 3. Japanese promoters offered millions for the spectacle of Mike Tyson fighting in Japan. Douglas was the perfect opponent. Credible enough name, good enough record, but ultimately no threat to the unbeatable champion.
His knockout highlight reel showed opponents going down like they'd been shot, unconscious before they hit the canvas. But behind the terrifying public image, Tyson's life was falling apart. His mentor and father figure, Cus D'Amato, had died in 1985. His manager, Jim Jacobs, died in 1988. Tyson's marriage to actress Robin Givens was a disaster that ended in very public divorce in 1989. He'd fired his longtime trainer, Kevin Rooney, in late 1988 after disputes over training methods and Tyson's increasingly erratic behavior. By early 1990, Tyson was being trained by Aaron Snowell and Jay Bright, trainers with far less experience than Rooney. More concerning was Tyson's training camp for the Douglas fight. Multiple accounts suggest Tyson didn't take Douglas seriously, didn't train properly, partied in Tokyo before the fight, and generally approached the bout as an easy payday, rather than a serious challenge. Bobby Brown, the R&B singer and one of Tyson's friends, later admitted in an interview that he and Tyson were partying in Japan right before the fight, with multiple women in their hotel rooms, staying up late, not focusing on the fight. Tyson himself would later acknowledge that he'd beaten himself through poor preparation and lack of focus. While Tyson was partying in Tokyo, Buster Douglas was in the most focused training camp of his life. After his mother died on January 19, 1990, Douglas dedicated himself completely to beating Tyson. His mother had believed in him when no one else did. She'd told him he could beat Mike Tyson if he trained properly and believed in himself. Her death, devastating as it was, gave Douglas purpose and motivation that had been absent in his career. This fight wasn't about money or rankings. It was about keeping a promise to his dying mother. Douglas's trainer John Russell designed a camp specifically to exploit what they saw as Tyson's weaknesses. Tyson was devastating against opponents who retreated, who tried to survive, who fought defensively. But Tyson had struggled in his few fights where opponents stood their ground, used reach advantage, and didn't show fear. Douglas, at 6'4", had 5-inch reach advantage over the 5'10" Tyson. Russell's plan was simple. Use the jab to keep Tyson at distance. Follow the jab with straight rights. Don't let Tyson get inside where his power was most dangerous. The plan required Douglas to be in the best shape of his life. Tyson's pressure was relentless. He'd walked through opponents for 4 years, breaking them physically and mentally. To withstand that pressure for 12 rounds, Douglas needed conditioning he'd never achieved before. Russell pushed him harder than any previous training camp. Douglas, motivated by his mother's memory, responded. He arrived in Tokyo weighing 231.5 pounds, lean and fit, with stamina to maintain his game plan for as long as necessary. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Tyson, the undefeated champion, partying in Tokyo, not taking his opponents seriously, believing his own hype about being invincible. Douglas, the massive underdog everyone had written off, in the best shape of his life, with motivation that transcended boxing, focused completely on executing a game plan he believed could work. The fight was scheduled for February 11, 1990, at the Tokyo Dome. The exact time was chosen to accommodate live HBO broadcasts in the United States, where it would be Saturday evening, February 10th. The Tokyo Dome seated over 50,000 people. The crowd was largely Japanese fans who'd come to see Mike Tyson, the legendary American champion. Most expected another quick knockout. The Japanese betting lines had Tyson as such an overwhelming favorite that meaningful betting was almost impossible. The opening bell rang at 12 noon Tokyo time. Douglas came out using his jab immediately, exactly as planned. Tyson, as expected, came forward aggressively, looking to get inside and land his devastating hooks and uppercuts. But Douglas's jab kept catching Tyson in the face. One jab, then another, then another. Tyson couldn't get close. When Tyson did manage to slip inside, Douglas would clinch, using his size and strength to tie up the smaller champion. The first round ended with Douglas winning clearly, something that hadn't happened to Tyson in years. Round 2 was more of the same. Douglas's jab, precise and powerful, snapped Tyson's head back repeatedly. Tyson's left eye was starting to swell. Douglas followed the jab with straight rights that landed cleanly. Tyson was struggling to adjust. His trainers, Aaron Snowell and Jay Bright, didn't have Kevin Rooney's experience in making mid-fight adjustments. They told Tyson to get inside, to stop the jab, but they didn't tell him how to do it against an opponent using reach advantage perfectly. By round 4, Tyson's left eye was badly swollen. The orbital
Douglas, you promised her. Finish this. Douglas, groggy but determined, nodded. He came out for round 9 and immediately reestablished his jab. Tyson, who'd nearly won the fight, couldn't capitalize. He was too damaged, too tired, too poorly prepared. Douglas won round 9 clearly, hurting Tyson with combinations that opened cuts on Tyson's face. Round 10 began with Douglas knowing he was close to victory. Tyson knew it too. The champion was desperate, trying to land one big punch that could change everything. But Douglas stayed disciplined, using his jab, moving when necessary, lending right hands that snapped Tyson's head back. 2 minutes into the round, Douglas saw his opening. Tyson, exhausted and hurt, was no longer moving his head, no longer slipping punches. Douglas threw a jab. Tyson barely reacted. Douglas threw a right hand that landed flush on Tyson's jaw. Tyson stumbled. Douglas saw the champion hurt and attacked. He threw a combination. Left hook to the body, right uppercut to the chin, left hook to the head. 4 punches in rapid succession. Tyson went down. Not a flash knockdown where the fighter bounces back up. A real knockdown. Tyson was on all fours, clearly stunned, groping for his mouthpiece that had been knocked out of his mouth. Referee Mayran began counting. Tyson tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work properly. He got one glove on the ropes, trying to pull himself up, but he was clearly not ready to continue. Mayran reached 10. The fight was over. Buster Douglas had knocked out Mike Tyson. The undefeated, undisputed, seemingly invincible heavyweight champion of the world had been defeated. The Tokyo Dome was silent, shocked. Jim Lambley's call on HBO became legendary. Let's go ahead and call it the biggest upset in the history of the sport. Say it now, gentlemen. James Buster Douglas, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Sugar Ray Leonard, sitting at ringside, was speechless. Larry Merchant, never at a loss for words, could only say, "This makes Cinderella look like a sad story." In the ring, Douglas was mobbed by his corner. He was crying, overwhelmed by emotion. "I did it, Mom," he kept saying. "I did it." His father, Billy Douglas, who trained him since childhood, was in tears. The fighter everyone called a quitter had just defeated the most feared champion in boxing. The 42-1 underdog had won. The impossible had happened. Mike Tyson, meanwhile, sat on his stool, head in his hands, barely comprehending what had occurred. His trainers were trying to console him, but Tyson was in shock. For 4 years, he'd been told he was invincible. He'd believed it.
Now, in front of millions watching live around the world, he'd been exposed as human, vulnerable, beatable. The aftermath of the fight was chaotic. Don King, Tyson's promoter, who also had promotional rights to Douglas, immediately tried to overturn the result. King argued the long count in round 8 meant Douglas should have been counted out, that Tyson should still be champion. King convinced the WBC and WBA to initially withhold recognition of Douglas as champion, claiming the count issue needed investigation. For 3 days, the boxing world debated whether Douglas was actually the champion. The argument collapsed under scrutiny. Multiple boxing authorities pointed out that referees' counts are final, that long counts had occurred in other fights without overturning results, and that even with the long count, Douglas had clearly won rounds 9 and 10, knocking Tyson out decisively. The WBC and WBA relented. Douglas was officially recognized as undisputed heavyweight champion on February 14th, 3 days after the fight. The fight's cultural impact was enormous. Sports Illustrated's cover showed Douglas standing over the fallen Tyson with the headline "Rocky Lives," comparing Douglas to the fictional movie boxer who defeated impossible odds. Every major newspaper ran the knockout photo on the front page. Mike Tyson, who'd seemed unstoppable, had been proven mortal. Boxing, which had become predictable with Tyson destroying everyone, was suddenly interesting again. For Buster Douglas, life changed instantly. He became the most famous athlete in the world for a few weeks. Everyone wanted interviews. He appeared on news programs, talk shows, anywhere that would have him. He was offered millions for commercials and endorsements. The WWE, which had originally planned to have Mike Tyson as special guest referee at WrestleMania,
Professional fight in 1999, retiring permanently at age 39 with a final record of 38 wins, 6 losses, and 1 draw. Mike Tyson's post-Douglas career was tumultuous. He fought 4 more times after losing to Douglas, winning all 4 by knockout, before being convicted of rape in February 1992, almost exactly 2 years after losing to Douglas. Tyson served 3 years in prison. After his release in 1995, he quickly regained the WBA and WBC heavyweight championships by defeating Frank Bruno and Bruce Seldon. But then, Evander Holyfield, the man who'd easily beaten Douglas, twice defeated Tyson. In their second fight, Tyson infamously biting off a piece of Holyfield's ear. Tyson never regained his pre-Douglas dominance. He continued fighting until 2005, racking up wins against mediocre opponents, but losing the important fights against quality opposition. His final fight was a loss to journeyman Kevin McBride, after which Tyson acknowledged that his career had really ended in 1990, when Douglas beat him. Everything after was just going through the motions. The boxing community has spent 35 years analyzing what happened on February 11, 1990. The consensus explanation has several components. First, Tyson didn't train properly. His partying in Tokyo and lack of serious preparation left him unprepared for a fighter as skilled as Douglas when Douglas was at his best. Second, Tyson had lost the support system that made him great. Cus D'Amato's death, Jim Jacobs' death, and Kevin Rooney's firing meant Tyson had no one to keep him disciplined and focused. Third, Douglas was genuinely great that night. His jab was perfect, his combinations were precise, his conditioning allowed him to maintain his performance for 10 rounds. Even a properly prepared Tyson might have lost to the Douglas who showed up that night. But the most important factor was motivation. Douglas was fighting for his mother's memory, for the promise he'd made to her before she died. That motivation transcended boxing. Tyson was fighting because it was his job, because Don King had arranged an opponent, because he'd done it 37 times before and won every time. Motivation matters in sports, and Douglas's motivation was infinitely stronger than Tyson's. The long-term assessments of both fighters are complicated. Buster Douglas is remembered almost exclusively for one fight. His career before Tyson was mediocre, his career after was a disaster. But that one night, he was perfect. He executed a game plan flawlessly against the most dangerous heavyweight in history. That performance, that night, is enough to secure his place in boxing history. As Douglas himself has noted with frustration, being called a one-hit wonder doesn't capture the achievement. Beating Mike Tyson, when Tyson was undefeated and considered unbeatable, is arguably the greatest single performance by any heavyweight boxer in modern history. Mike Tyson's legacy is more complex. He was 23 years old when he lost to Douglas, already the youngest heavyweight champion ever, already with 9 successful title defenses, already with one of the most terrifying highlight reels in boxing history. The loss to Douglas revealed that Tyson was human, that his intimidation factor could be overcome, that his style had weaknesses, but it didn't erase what he'd accomplished before. Tyson is still considered one of the greatest heavyweights ever, despite losing to Douglas and despite his later career struggles. The ESPN 30 for 30 documentary 42-1 examines the fight in detail, interviewing both Douglas and Tyson, their trainers, and witnesses to the fight. The documentary makes clear that both fighters knew the upset was possible. Douglas had believed he could win if he executed his plan and Tyson wasn't at his best. Tyson, retrospectively, acknowledged he'd beaten himself through poor preparation. The documentary also reveals that very few people outside Douglas's immediate circle believed the upset could happen. Even Douglas's own family members had doubts. The impact on boxing was significant. After Douglas beat Tyson, heavyweight boxing became unpredictable again. The sense that Tyson would dominate for a decade, that he was unbeatable, was gone. Evander Holyfield became champion after beating Douglas. Riddick Bowe, Lennox Lewis, and others followed. The heavyweight division, which had seemed like Tyson's personal domain, was suddenly wide open. The 42-1 odds reflected universal belief that Douglas had no chance. Looking back, those odds were absurd. Douglas was a legitimate top 10 heavyweight with size and skill advantages over Tyson. In a fair fight, where both men were properly prepared, Douglas had real chances to win. The odds reflected Tyson's reputation more than objective analysis. This is a lesson that applies beyond boxing. Reputation and perception can create odds that don't reflect reality. For the rest of his life, Douglas would be defined by February 11, 1990. Every article about him mentions the Tyson fight in the first paragraph. Every interview asks about that night. Douglas has said he's both proud of the accomplishment and frustrated that nothing else he did matters to most people. He's raised a family, coached youth boxing, done charity work in Columbus, Ohio. But to the world, he's the man who knocked out Mike Tyson. That's